My European in-laws refused to come to my Thanksgiving dinner. I spent 3 days cooking a traditional American feast: turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie, the whole spread. I invited my husband's family from Germany 6 weeks in advance. They said they'd think about it. 2 days before Thanksgiving, his mother called and said they wouldn't be coming. No explanation, just a polite decline. I was devastated and confused. My husband tried to smooth things over, but I demanded to know why. That's when they told me the truth. They thought Thanksgiving was barbaric, excessive, and represented everything wrong with American culture. They said watching Americans gorge themselves on obscene amounts of food while pretending to be grateful was performative and disgusting. They refused to participate in what they called American gluttony theater. Yeah, I'd never felt so insulted and misunderstood in my life. My name is Sarah, and I married Klaus 3 years ago. We met while I was studying abroad in Berlin. After we got married, we settled in Chicago, where I grew up. Klaus adapted to American life relatively well, but his family back in Germany remained skeptical of America, and particularly skeptical of me. They were polite during our wedding, but distant. I always felt like they were judging me, analyzing my every move, waiting for me to confirm their negative opinions about Americans. Klaus's mother Ingrid, his father Werner, and his sister Katrin visited us once before, about a year into our marriage. That visit was tense and uncomfortable. They criticized everything subtly. The portion sizes at restaurants were grotesque. American bread was too sweet. Our apartment was too big for 2 people. Americans drove everywhere instead of walking. We smiled too much at strangers. Everything about American life seemed to offend their European sensibilities. I tried to be understanding and patient, but it felt like nothing I did was right. When Thanksgiving approached this year, I thought it would be a perfect opportunity to show them authentic American culture and hospitality. Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. It's about family, gratitude, and sharing a meal together. I thought if Klaus's family experienced a real American Thanksgiving, they'd understand us better and maybe warm up to me. Klaus warned me they might not be interested, but I insisted. I wanted to try. I sent them a heartfelt invitation explaining what Thanksgiving meant to me and how much it would mean to have them there. Their initial response was non-committal. Ingrid said they'd discuss it and let us know. Weeks passed with no answer. I followed up twice, trying not to seem pushy but wanting to plan accordingly. Finally, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, they said they'd come. I was thrilled. I started planning the most elaborate Thanksgiving dinner I'd ever attempted. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted to prove to them that American traditions had value and beauty. I researched traditional recipes and spent a fortune on ingredients. I bought a 20-pound turkey, made stuffing from scratch, prepared 3 types of potatoes, baked fresh bread, made cranberry sauce, roasted vegetables, and planned 3 pies. I decorated the apartment with fall colors, bought nice linens, and created place cards. I was going all out to impress them and show them the best of American hospitality. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Ingrid called Klaus. I could hear his side of the conversation and immediately knew something was wrong. His face fell. He argued with her in German, his voice frustrated and tense. When he hung up, he looked at me with anger and sadness. He said his family wasn't coming. They'd decided not to attend. No real explanation, just that they didn't feel comfortable participating. I was stunned. I'd already spent hundreds of dollars on food. I'd taken time off work to prepare. I'd emotionally invested in bringing our families together through this meal, and they were canceling 2 days before with no real reason. I started crying. Klaus tried to comfort me, but I pushed him away. I demanded to know the real reason. I said they owed us an honest explanation. Klaus called his mother back and put her on speakerphone. I'll never forget that conversation. Ingrid spoke in English so I could understand. She said she needed to be honest with us. She said they'd discussed it as a family and decided they couldn't in good conscience attend an American Thanksgiving dinner. I asked why. She said, because Thanksgiving represents everything we find problematic about American culture. She continued, you take 1 day a year to perform gratitude while consuming obscene amounts of food. You cook enough to feed 15 people for a family of 5. You waste resources and excess food while people go hungry. You celebrate a holiday based on a sanitized myth about colonizers and indigenous people. And you call it tradition. It's not tradition. It's theatrical gluttony disguised as family values. I was speechless. Klaus looked mortified. Werner got on the phone. He said, we've seen how Americans eat. The portion sizes are grotesque. You put enough food on one plate to feed a family for 2 days in some countries, and on Thanksgiving you multiply that excess by 10. We've read about Americans eating until they're physically ill, then bragging about it. That's not celebration. That's disorder. We can't participate in that. I tried to defend it, but he kept going. Katrin added her perspective. She said, American food culture is already problematic every day, but Thanksgiving takes it to an extreme. You spend days preparing massive amounts of food, most of which will be thrown away or eaten until people are sick. You normalize overconsumption and call it gratitude. The irony is lost on Americans. You say you're grateful while wasting resources that much of the world doesn't have access to. It's performative and honestly disgusting. Ingrid said something that really hurt. She said, Sarah, we like you as a person, but you're asking us to participate in something that goes against our values. In Germany, we value moderation, sustainability, and genuine gratitude. American Thanksgiving is the opposite. It's excess, waste, and performance. We can't pretend to celebrate something we find morally objectionable just to make you happy. We're being honest with you, which is more respectful than lying and attending anyway. I was crying openly now. I said Thanksgiving wasn't about excess or waste. It was about family gathering together and being grateful for what we have. Ingrid said, but you express that gratitude by cooking enough food to feed a small village and eating until you're uncomfortable. That's not gratitude. That's consumption. True gratitude would be cooking a reasonable meal, donating to people who need food, and spending time together without making food the centerpiece of everything. Werner added, every year we read about American food waste on Thanksgiving. Millions of pounds of food thrown away. Turkeys that could have fed people ending up in garbage. And Americans act like this is normal and wholesome. It's neither. It's a symptom of a culture that mistakes abundance for blessing and consumption for celebration. We respect you too much to lie and say we're comfortable with this. Klaus tried to defend American culture and me. He said they were being unfair and judging something they didn't understand. Katrin said, we understand perfectly. We've lived in America. We've seen the grocery stores with 50 types of cereal. We've seen restaurants throwing away more food in one night than German restaurants waste in a month. We've seen the normalization of excess. Thanksgiving is just the most concentrated example of a year-round problem. The conversation ended badly. They offered to take us out to a nice restaurant instead, a normal meal with reasonable portions where we could talk and spend time together. I said no. If they couldn't respect my traditions and my efforts, then we had nothing to celebrate together. Klaus sided with me, telling his family they'd insulted his wife, and their decision was hurtful and judgmental. Ingrid said she was sorry we felt hurt, but she wouldn't apologize for being honest about her values. After the call, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by ingredients for a feast nobody wanted. Klaus held me while I cried. Part of me understood their perspective intellectually, but emotionally I felt rejected and insulted. I'd tried so hard to bridge our cultural differences, and they'd told me my entire culture was morally bankrupt. That's a hard thing to hear from your in-laws. Klaus and I talked for hours that night. He said, they're not entirely wrong about American consumption culture, but they're being harsh to you personally. You're not responsible for all of American culture, and your Thanksgiving dinner isn't a political statement. I asked if he agreed with their assessment. He said honestly, some points are valid. American portion sizes shocked me when I first moved here. Thanksgiving does involve a lot of food, more than we need. But it's also about tradition, family, and gratitude. My family is focusing on the excess and ignoring the meaning behind it. We decided to have Thanksgiving anyway, just the two of us. I scaled down the meal significantly. As I cooked, I couldn't stop thinking about what Klaus's family had said. Was I really preparing excessive amounts of food? Was Thanksgiving about consumption more than gratitude? Had I been blind to the excess because it was normalized in my culture? I looked at the turkey I'd bought. 20 pounds for 2 people was objectively ridiculous. Even with leftovers, we'd be eating turkey for a week or throwing half away. I'd bought 3 types of potatoes when one would suffice. I'd planned 3 pies when we could barely finish one. Klaus's family wasn't entirely wrong. I had been planning an excessively large meal because that's what Thanksgiving meant to me. Big, abundant, excessive. When did American Thanksgiving become about how much food you could fit on a table? Thanksgiving Day was quiet and sad. Klaus and I ate our scaled-down meal in near silence. The food was good, but the joy was gone. I kept thinking about Klaus's family in Germany, probably feeling justified and convinced they'd made the morally superior choice. Part of me was angry at them for ruining my holiday. Part of me was angry at myself for not seeing their point sooner. Klaus's aunt reached out a few days later. She said, "I understand both sides. American Thanksgiving seems excessive to Europeans because European food culture is different. We eat smaller portions, waste less, value quality over quantity, but Americans genuinely don't see Thanksgiving as wasteful. They see it as abundant and celebratory. Neither perspective is wrong. They're just different cultural values clashing." She continued, "Ingrid and Werner are very principled people. They genuinely struggle with American overconsumption. It's not personal to you, Sarah. They'd have the same objection to any American Thanksgiving, but they could have been more diplomatic instead of making it sound like a moral judgment on you personally." I appreciated her reaching out, but it didn't erase the hurt. Klaus's immediate family had rejected a core part of my identity and culture. They'd reduced Thanksgiving to gluttony and waste, when to me it represented family, tradition, and gratitude. Yes, there's a lot of food involved, but the food is a vehicle for gathering people together, not the point itself. Over the following weeks, I researched American Thanksgiving food waste. The statistics were shocking. Americans throw away over 200 million pounds of turkey every Thanksgiving. 30% of all food prepared ends up in garbage. The environmental impact is enormous. Klaus's family wasn't exaggerating. American Thanksgiving does involve massive waste. European holiday meals showed stark contrast. They involve far less food per person, focusing on quality over overwhelming abundance. Leftovers are less common because people cook appropriate amounts. The idea of eating until physically uncomfortable, which Americans joke about, is seen as disordered eating in much of Europe. Klaus and I had several difficult conversations about culture, values, and what traditions we wanted to build in our marriage. He said, "I love that you wanted to share Thanksgiving with my family, but maybe we need to think about what version makes sense for us. We can create our own version that reflects both of our values." I resisted this at first. Changing Thanksgiving felt like betraying my family and culture. But I realized Klaus had a point. Why was I planning to cook enough food for 10 people when only 2 were eating? Why did I feel Thanksgiving wasn't legitimate unless the table was overflowing? Those beliefs came from my culture, but that didn't mean they were the only way. The following year, we did Thanksgiving completely differently. We invited Klaus's family again, and this time they came. I cooked a small turkey breast instead of a whole bird. We had 3 side dishes instead of 10, 1 pie instead of 3. Everything was high quality and delicious, but the portions were reasonable. We had enough for dinner and maybe 1 leftover meal. Ingrid complimented the meal and thanked me for reconsidering how we celebrated. She said, "This feels like genuine gratitude. We're eating beautiful food, enjoying each other's company, and not wasting resources. This I can participate in with a clear conscience." I appreciated her words, but part of me still felt like I'd compromised too much. Werner noticed my mixed feelings. He said, "Sarah, you look sad. Do you feel like we forced you to change your tradition?" I admitted I did feel that way. He said, "I understand, and I'm sorry if we made you feel judged. Our objection wasn't to you or your intentions. It was to the scale and excess. What you created this year is still Thanksgiving. It still has all the meaning and none of the waste. That's growth, not betrayal." Katrin added something helpful. She said, "Every culture has excessive traditions that don't make sense to outsiders. Germans have Oktoberfest, where we drink absurd amounts of beer and eat massive pretzels. Italians have 7 fish dishes on Christmas Eve. French meals can last 5 hours. Every culture has ways of celebrating that seem extreme to others." The question is whether we're willing to examine our own traditions and ask if they still serve their intended purpose. Over time, I've come to a complicated peace with what happened. Klaus's family was harsh in how they communicated their discomfort. They hurt my feelings, but they weren't entirely wrong about American Thanksgiving excess. Many Americans do cook too much food, waste enormous amounts, and prioritize abundance over sustainability. That's a legitimate cultural criticism, even if painful to hear. I've realized that tradition doesn't have to mean doing things exactly as they've always been done. I can honor the spirit of Thanksgiving without replicating the excess I grew up with. My smaller, more thoughtful Thanksgivings feel more aligned with actual gratitude than the overflowing tables I used to think were necessary. Klaus's relationship with his family is still complicated. He's angry, they hurt me, and wishes they'd been more diplomatic. But he also appreciates their honesty and willingness to eventually participate in a modified version of the holiday. We visit them in Germany most years now. The relationship isn't perfect, but it's honest. Looking back, that refused Thanksgiving invitation was the beginning of me questioning many American cultural norms I'd accepted without thinking. Portion sizes, food waste, consumption as celebration, excess as abundance. Klaus's family held up a mirror to American culture, and I didn't like everything I saw. But seeing it clearly has made me more intentional about how I live and what traditions I continue. The lesson I learned is that cultural traditions deserve examination, not blind loyalty. Just because something has always been done a certain way doesn't mean it's the best way. European and American cultures approach food, celebration, and gratitude differently. Neither is objectively superior. But being willing to question your own culture's excesses is how we grow. My relationship with Klaus's family will probably always have tension. We come from fundamentally different cultural perspectives, but I respect that they were honest with me, even when that honesty hurt. They didn't lie and attend a celebration they found morally objectionable. That's a kind of integrity I've learned to appreciate. Thanksgiving will never mean the same thing to me, but maybe that's not entirely a bad thing.